Testing, 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 testing. Okay, guys. So I made a video yesterday about the voice of reason guy. But I don't know. For some reason, it just didn't work. I mean, you couldn't even listen to it and understand what was going on. Maybe it was the wind. I don't know. I'm doing these videos outside. Anyways, I've got a new microphone to work on this. So, anyways, let's begin. Okay, so before I before I begin talking about this guy Alex from Voice of Reason, just wanted to make sure it's not because I am trying to kick this guy down when he's already down, right? I'm going through these YouTube channels, not just Alex, but just anyone in the YouTube, like Catholic influencers, and I'm noticing certain things that they don't take into consideration. But more importantly, is the I just for some reason like I know I can recognize the dynamics of why us Catholics we have been I guess trained to hide things in a way where it perpetuates the sexual abuse of minors in the confessional, or not even just the confessional, but the sexual abuse of minors, right? And so I'm noticing these things, and I'm going through these YouTube videos and critiquing what we can do better so that we build a culture that doesn't, you know, help with the cover up, Okay, so I've noticed recently the word scandal, using that word, we've picked it up. We've picked it up from the clergy, right? For the sake, look, anyone does, everyone, all Christians, you you're not always we're not always doing what we should be doing, but when we do get, uh, when we get inspired by the Holy Spirit to evangelize or even let people know about the faith, you're going to get people eventually trying to basically tell that, the tell the bad stuff that we did, obviously. So I understand why people use the word scandal, um, because they just don't want to, continue talking about what they did, right? Okay. Um, and I can see, that using the word scandal also has its benefits. Okay, the benefits are is this. One of the benefits is it divides the actual physical, or I guess grave matter that was done I guess the accusation. I shouldn't say the actual reality of it, but the accusation of the grave matter that was done. It separates it from the culpability the individual who is being accused had, right? So there is that sense where you can, protect the. Unfortunately, the reality is you know, it's an accusation. It's not yet confirmed of the facts, right? So that's what I'm trying to say. Like you're protecting the accused because we first have to see the culpability of that accused as well, right? Um, so I understand why, because anyone can just accuse anyone, right? So hiding what the person so-called did by saying the word scandal to deflect, it makes sense. But when we're talking about um, the reality of the sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, and if it is in fact reality that a child is abused and they want to accuse a person, um, the the people who are trying to figure out how this could happen, how can a person in authority do what they did, they don't really, they never get to learn about the inner dispositions that individuals have to rationalize their actions, whether they did something or not did something, right? They don't get to understand the the way the conscience is formed and understood in the Catholic Church, right? The reality is, a person can spend their entire life doing what they're supposed to do as a laity in the Catholic Church, without ever knowing the inner dispositions that make them doing what they're doing. Basically, they can just, like, what I'm trying to say is, in our hearts we know how to act, right? Even without explicitly saying the principles that govern our actions. So um, it's it's just it just is sometimes it is just that way. So, and I'll give you an example. But what I'm trying to say is reduced culpability, not physical, philosophical freedom, psychological freedom, the knowledge of the facts of is what you're doing is good or bad. All these things come into play, right? In determining the culpability of an evil act done, or even a good act done, right? We are judged by the freedom we do, right? So, for example, if you see someone doing an evil thing, the culpability is still unknown in them. Obviously, now in the civil law, we have people who are psychologically screwed up. So, in that sense, they do. We know that there is such a thing as being psychologically screwed up. The So, in a sense, we know this. We're grown up understanding this, but applying it to the people in the Catholic Church, there is still a reduced culpability in cases where you're not. It's not obvious a person is reduced in if their freedom is diminished, right? Or their knowledge is, or for example, they were taught by some other person in authority that something bad was good or something good was bad, or all these things is not understood by the laity and the people trying to stop this sexual abuse of minors, right? So, um, like I didn't even know. Like I've been practicing my faith after university. For while I grew up as a Catholic, it's just during university time fell back, and then after university I came back, right? But um, I I'm 41 years old, and it's only recently, a couple of years now, I would say maybe last 5 years, I even researched about things and learned about reduced culpability, philosophical freedom, psychological freedom, all these things in a disposition that can reduce culpability of one's actions. And the only reason I learned about it is because I am actively within these 5 years trying to figure out why this sexual abuse of minors continues to happen, and trying to figure out, okay, where are the holes in like, where are the leaking the cracks in the church basically, right? Where are people, you know, what are people not seeing that they should be seeing? You know what I'm saying? Like, and I found out it's because we're not educated in what the priests are educated, because the priests have to, when we go to confession, they have to understand our culpability, so they know a lot of things of the inner disposition and the way our conscience works to finally come with the conclusion of whether they're doing something good or bad, right? But we just do it based on what our conscience does, right? But there is a process of calculation that we are unaware of when we do our actions, right? We are unaware of this calculation, but it's necessary to explain to you guys why. If someone gets abused, or someone gets abused and there's accusation, why the clergy transfers the accused somewhere else where no one knows about it, and we learned that they did all this, and we're like so surprised, how can they do this? But it's precisely for this reason of other people not knowing that they uh, they in the principles of morality justify the fact that it's precisely because other people don't know when they transfer, that it's in their mind they've done something that is permissible in the morality, using the principles of morality. It's called invincible ignorance, right? It's putting the sadly the accuser, I mean, not the accuser, the person being accused, in a place where no one knows that they were accused, whether that person actually did it or not. They put them in a place where people don't know about it, right? And it's good for a person who was falsely accused, because they shouldn't be judged by that, right? But then you have cases where they actually did do the thing, and then they're put in places where no one knows that they did it, and that's the problem. That's what I'm trying to fix, right? So one of the things that I'm trying to fix is basically educating you guys about the inner dispositions that the majority of you won't even know about things, right? So yeah, let me pause for a sec, and I'll come back. I just need a sip of water and a coffee, okay? So give me a minute, okay? Okay, testing, 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 testing. Okay, so one of the things. So, anyways, if you look at this video about this guy Alex from Voice of Reason, he's denying the fact that he did something, right? When he was like 20 years old with a minor. So he's denying it. Okay, fine. But at that age, when you're 20 years old, really, you're not grown up yet in terms of. I don't think you're even grown up at that point where the like I remember when I was that age, people around me, we weren't there's a lot of stupid stuff you would think of, but even in that age, I don't think anyone actually wants anyone younger than them at that age, right? So usually at that age, you want someone, I guess, the same age as you, right? So what what are the possibilities, right? Well, you could have an individual who is 15 lying that they are older than they should be, right? Um, and unfortunately, look, this is not about the um, like I'm trying to be sensitive to actual people who do get abused, but which is why I have the Michelangelo Code, by the way, so that these whoever gets abused can send their cry for help to be heard to the app, right? And then people can get I guess, a measure of alarm they should have for an individual, whether they want to be alone with them. It's not something for the law per se. Like it's not a definitive thing that a person who is accused is actually guilty of certain actions. But the more actual um, victims let their cry for help be heard of a specific accuser that is transferred around different churches with ignorant laity, the more there is a pattern of this one person getting accused, then a parent can have the a measure of alarm they can have in sending their minor child to be alone with in an event where that priest is around, right? So um, it's not supposed to be a definitive thing, right? Of course, there will be always false accusations, and I have already, you know, I've already let the Vatican know so that they can mitigate the bad consequences of those false accusations, right? There will be dialogue in terms of they the Vatican can figure out ways of seeing like look, there are a lot of pedophiles in the Catholic Church. They may not say it publicly, but there are, and some of them actually have asked God for forgiveness. So those individuals know they did something wrong. If they after they get forgiven, they have to try to be good, right? So they can actually help with this problem by being test subjects, right? The Pope can do something to allow these people who are have remorse um, participate in having some sort of technology that you know takes the data points of the kind of like lie detector test, like, get more data from these people so that it gives a fair assessment of whether you actually have a abuser that is lying in the lie detector. So what I'm trying to say is, not only am I going to this app is going to allow people to let their craft out be heard, but there will be other independent branches of the Michelangelo Code that will produce the the technology to counteract the false accusations. Okay, those independent branches are going to be working with the Vatican. Is what I'm trying to say. So this should be this is this app or whatever. It will be ongoing. It's something that will progress in terms of a person being accused. Initially maybe is a high measure of alarm, but then at that point, the priest can go to the independent branch of the Michelangelo Code that's trying to um, that'll do lie detector tests on these priests to see if they actually did what they did, right? If they pass, then they reduce the measure of alarm in the Michelangelo Code app, right? It's as simple as that, right? So it's a call for the Vatican to get their pedophiles who have who don't approve of it anymore, have changed, get them to do tests. We'll People have to do tests on them, on their like heartbeats and their pulse and all these things. They have to ask questions like, did you suck someone's, like, did you get your dick sucked, things like that. Did you um like actual, not vague things, but actual things, Anyways, guys, it's about to rain. Let me go underneath this. Okay, so the thing is, yeah, it can't be vague questions to these priests, right? It has to be actual, hardcore. Like, we're not. It has to be like the actual act being done. Um, like for example, touching someone's hair, even though it's weird, won't be seen as anything. Like literally, this guy, Father Carlos Martins, he got accused of touching a girl's hair and saying some things, but he's not found guilty anymore because no one wanted to go to the you know no one wanted to go to the jury to testify, right? But even in that little case, touching a hair is not something to be. The Michelangelo Code is meant for the worst actions, like actual sex. You know, if you read the documents of the actual victims of pedophilia, you have kids, guys, like little prepubescent kids, get raped up their ass, coming home, like walking home with blood in their freaking, like, it's that bad. And that's what, like, those kind of things that I'm talking about, um actual, proper, like that. Someone's dick has to go somewhere inside another person's body. Basically, is what I'm trying to say. It's not little things. It's actual physical sex that I'm talking about. Okay, these things are going to be the main measure of alarm you should have. Okay, so yeah. Anyways, so is the grave really hard matched, like bad evil things? that the Michelangelo Code is gonna address, right? Um, yeah, so the reason I even went on that rant is that I don't even know why I went on that rant. Um, but it's important you guys know this. And yeah, give me a second. Let me take a pause, okay? Let me have a cup of my coffee. Okay, guys, I'm back. Let me just test to see if this is still working. Give me a second. Testing, 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 testing. Okay, let me see. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, so, huh. Another aspect of the app is going to be to see if the individuals in like the actual priests or whoever, even like this guy Alex, the individuals, whatever they're teaching, do they bring nuance into the situation? Do they polarize kind of thing, right? Because it's because of the polarization that we get individuals who don't want to step up and say something wrong is going on. It's precisely because of the polarization that makes an individual's conscience feel like they shouldn't let other people know, as if they're going to go to hell because of that, right? Because no one, the majority of laity don't grow in their understanding of how the conscience even works, right? They have a vague understanding of how it works. It's where their thinking is just a feeling. So let me just follow your feeling, right? But the process of the conscience, it actually uses logic. Though we don't notice it, it does use a logic involved in it, right? Um, so yeah, so a high degree of an estimate of whether an individual or person in authority in the Catholic Church or influencers or whatever, if they're around little kids, if they are being if they're not saying the nuances um, of the faith, the exception. If they don't say there are exceptions to the rules, if they're not answering questions you have, if they just dismiss the Old Testament and the fact that there are so many things that, for example, ultra conservatives won't even talk about God and what God does in the Old Testament because it's it ruins the whole warm fuzzy feeling, or it ruins the reality of God's justice, and um, is not is not a nice fuzzy nice God, right? It's and also the yeah, I mean, just read the Old Testament and you'll figure out certain things. For example, there is a couple of scripture verses that says God deceives, and this is something I figured out. Um, there's a difference between lying and deception, and a lot of people don't think that God will deceive people. In the Old Testament, you have the higher ups in the hierarchy when they worshipped other gods. At that point, God made the people get deceived from that priest or prophet or whatever, because that prophet or priest had gone away from God, who is truth itself. So the punishment was for God to send the spirit to deceive that prophet, and also the people asking that prophet to prophesy. It was God is the one that sent and asked in heaven, or in the congregation of angels or whatever. God asked, who who wants to deceive this prophet that has gone astray? And a spirit comes to the throne of God and says, I'll do it. And then God says, okay, go do it, right? This has happened, but you're not going to hear this from anyone, right? This is why when I was concerned about the Pachamama issue, when the perception that the Vatican had when they brought people to the Vatican to have there's a rites, what's it called? Amazon Synod, okay? That was 5 years ago. I was concerned, and I wanted to make sure that the inner disposition of the Pope was correct, right? Because according to the media, it looked like he brought people to the Vatican, and those individuals were worshiping idols, and it seemed that way, right? The perception was that way. 5 years later, I figured out that these people were actually Catholics and they weren't worshiping idols, but they did poses, they did all these gestures that seemed like they were worshiping idols, but it's perception, right? So the inner disposition wasn't explained to the laity, to us, which needed to be explained, right? So what I'm trying to say is, even the Pope, if he starts idol worship, like, we're going to be misled by him talking. And I'm speaking of, when I'm not talking about formal documents. I'm talking about him just speaking, right? Um, they're like, I know in the Catholic faith there's this thing called ex cathedra, but I'm not talking about that, right? I'm talking about him just talking. And I was worried about that, right? So you're gonna have this, and the word scandal, as I said before, it stops us from seeking and understanding the inner disposition of the conscience, and calling people out and asking them to explain their reasoning. I know, like, when you talk to someone on high authority, they don't want you to be saying, like, explain your reason. They'll feel like they don't need to because they're higher in authority, right? It makes sense, right? Just if you're a dad and your child says, "Explain yourself, Dad," like a little kid, explain yourself. What are you going to actually explain yourself? Your process of reasoning is likely you won't do it if they're like really young. So this is kind of like how it is with them, right? You're a baby to them in terms of, even if you're like 40 years old like me, or 20, 30, you're still a baby to them, because in their mind, these priests, they know about the rationale, the principles of morality that you most likely don't know, right? So they treat you like a baby. And it's funny because the people outside of the church who are able to get married, or they grow up not trying to be celibate. And it's funny because the laity believe they're the adults, and the, the priests who are celibate are the babies. So it's weird because of this, there's never this nuance explained. No one wants to. They want to be nice. They want to be kind. They want to not scandalize. It's funny because even the laity, when you talk to a priest or whatever, they don't even want to scandalize the priest. They don't want to say bad words or all these things that I'm just saying out loud, right? The obvious things that needs to be addressed, right? So it's both the laity and the 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 clerics that believe that the other side are little babies that need pampering, and need to be soothed by their words, and need to be charmed, and all these things to keep them in dialogue with each other. But when the hard, bad, more like actual things need to be addressed, not no one really explains or talks to it about. That's why I'm explaining myself, and this is why I believe that God is giving, if not me, he is. If you guys don't have to believe, but I believe that he actually is giving dispensations for individuals to do certain things that without his dispositions they will go to hell. But because he is giving the disposition to police this church, these people have to explain themselves. So I'm helping with this explanation. I'm trying to search for these people who have the call to defend the little children from pedophilia, and to see, if maybe God has called them, and I'm here to tell you, if you're listening, listen to what I've posted on the podcast on myguardianangel.com, and also the /player podcast, because there are a lot of principles you need to know, not just the horizontal principles that the church hierarchy teaches, okay, because that's what the majority of people are made to follow. But there are other principles. There is a horizontal principles related to God and man that no one really wants to talk about, especially the hierarchy, because um, that will involve them having to explain and read the Old Testament, where there is slavery, where there is justice, where there is um, the punishment from God. There is all these things that in this society we don't want to talk about, right? And it needs to be talked about, right? We don't. It needs to be addressed. There's wars, all these things, right? So, anyways, tough topics, right? Um, like in the Old Testament, there is acknowledgement of hierarchical structures, right? Where one has power and the other doesn't. Like, although the end does not justify the means when we're talking about the horizontal realm between mankind and mankind, when we talk about structures that naturally are created by just nature in general, when there is a hierarchy and there needs to be police and armies, there are different principles. Like that principle of the end does not justify the means. It doesn't work when we're dealing with a hierarchical position in the hierarchy. When a person takes that position, they don't have in some cases, with boundaries, of course, they don't have to follow that rule of the end does not justify the means. This is what I'm trying to say. Like, we're thinking that the hierarchical structure are doing things that are perfect and nice and whatever, and when we find out that is not exactly what we as laity should do with other people one on one in the horizontal realm of morality, when we figure out this thing, we get so sad and we fall out of our faith. We don't actually go into the battle of trying to save the kids from pedophilia. We actually get out, right? Anyways, I think that's it for today. Okay. Yeah. All right. God bless, guys. See you later. Bye.